Babies. Most people like them. But did you know that we as a society actually need babies? No surprise, but in much parts of the Western world, we don't have enough babies. And Japan is no different. If you've seen recent headlines, you know that Japan's population is actually decreasing. Last year, the population of Japan decreased by 900,000 people. My friends abroad suggest that it's up to me to save the Japanese. And what I think they meant is I need to make a video on the topic. Something like that. Anyhow, let's go through that document together. Trevor in Tokyo. Well, the recent news has come out. The population of Japan over the last year has decreased by almost 1 million people. To help try to figure out why Japan's population keeps decreasing and why the fertility rate is so low, Japan's been performing these surveys, basically asking young unmarried people and married women, why are you not having more babies? And what do you need to do to make sure that we have more babies so that Japan in the future continues to exist? The last reported version of the survey was 2021, but I actually received the newest version of this survey, the 17th Fertility Survey, that I filled out a couple of months ago, and it seems like the data hasn't been published yet. But this is a questionnaire packet that goes through a whole bunch of different questions asking what do we need to do as the Japanese government to try to encourage people to have more babies. Thought it'd be interesting to look through. So as I noted, this was directed at unmarried members of both sexes, as well as married women. Survey sample size was sent out over 14,000 packets with return rate of about 9,000, so it's a reasonably good sample size. The long and short of it is that the desirability of marriage is slowly decreasing, and the ability to have a child within this environment is also slowly decreasing. But the number one factor which seems to be causing this fertility crisis is the lack of marriage between young people. So here's a graph of the desirability of marriage by men and women over time, where on the x-axis we have the survey year, which is usually given in 2, 3, or 4 year intervals, as well as the general desirability with males on the left and females on the right. You'll see that there's a negative trend over time over the last 50 years or so, but still fairly high. So the issue isn't just a blanket hatred of marriage. Now, what is interesting is if you take that overall composite group and then you break it down into different age brackets. For teenagers, the older teenage group, the young 20s, the old 20s, and the early 30s. And while you see that the desirability to get married decreases across all categories for men and women, you really start to see a precipitous drop-off towards the 30s and up, perhaps as they get more stable or the desirability of marriage really starts to decrease as their adult life becomes more solidified. Now, part of the question surveys that I thought were interesting is they did a forced choice for both remaining single and for remaining married, where they gave you a list of options and said, given being single or being married, what do you perceive as a single person as the best benefits for remaining single or getting married, and being forced to answer for both different categories. So what we have here on the chart is basically over time, over the different survey categories for men and women, what do they perceive as the primary advantages to getting married? They gave us 9 answers to choose from on the survey and wanted 2 for the results that we're supposed to rank order. So for men and women, the same things are to obtain a mentally relaxing space, so to produce a relaxing home, still remains high, even if there's a downward trend in time. As well as I was happy to see that one of the reasons that people want to get married is they actually want to have a family and children of their own, as opposed to some of these other options which might be a bit more superficial. Some trends that were a little bit different for the men and women, though, were for becoming financially secure, as Japan's financial situation continues to stagnate. The attractiveness for a woman for a marriage prospect, which she might be able to increase her income or increase resources available to her, has been increasing in time, as well as this growing societal pressure to get married, which is still present for men and women. When forced to make the choice of what would be one of the main benefits to remaining single, regardless of whether or not you want to remain single or choose to marry, for men and women the choice was very clear. The top answer by far has been to maintain the freedom to do what you want and when you want, with really nothing else taking a close second. Then the more pertinent question is, well, you're single. We don't want you to be single. So why are you still single? And looking at over time for both men and women, broken down into the younger age group of 18 to 24 or the older age group from 25 to 34 for both men and women. You see some interesting differences in the trends, where for young people, they still feel too young to get married for both men and women, which is basically absent for the 25 to 34 group. Whereas the main growth for the older age group seems to be they just simply haven't found a suitable partner. And this has maintained the same over the survey dates. And unlike what some people in Congress would like to have you believe, the primary reason that people are single is not they want to devote themselves to work and study. And they don't just simply want to play video games in mom's basement. Nor can they not even get along with the opposite sex. Although this seems to be a growing trend as of recent, but still minor. So at least for self-reported answers for the older age group, the reason that people are not getting married or the reason they are still single is simply because they haven't met the person they want to not be single with. So this one's a little bit different than you might see in the West. So here's one where we're asked, like, okay, you're single, but have you ever not been single? For men and for women, for the different age groups. What we see is that there's a significant amount of people who just simply don't have any dating experience at all, given by this lighter gray box, where for men in total was 37% of young adults, and for women 32% of young adults have had no romantic dating experiences with a person of the opposite sex. Where for the youngest category was almost 50% for age 18-19 have had no relationships, but even going up to 34 years old, that still maintains the 36 for men and 30% for women. So I guess there's two ways to look at it. One is to say that 30% is a pretty high number for never having any romantic experience by the time you reach 34, which would translate into not having a marriage relationship if you don't have a dating relationship, but also that for the people who have had a dating relationship that hasn't turned over into a marriage relationship. I would be curious to see the similar results in the US. Are you engaging in certain activities which would bring about children? Yes or no? For single people, you'll see that even for the different age groups, you do have a difference of percentiles, but comparable between men and women, with a maintained trend over time for the different age groups, perhaps a slight decrease over the last survey conditions. On some things, the sexes are quite similar when it comes to trying to find a potential ideal spouse to find a relationship. So when asking single people, what are the criteria you need to find a spouse of the opposite sex, it turns out we're not that different after all. That for both men and women, having a good personality is the most important, and this has been retained in time, with additional considerations to appearance and an understanding of work being important. However, the educational background, occupation, financial resources of the woman is not as important to the man. Women have higher bars in general for their requirements for their mate, suggesting a higher overall standard, but still seem to prioritize similar things, where personality is almost universally important for women. And maybe taken in total financial resources as a consideration, but also a high must-have consideration to household skills such as cleaning, doing the laundry, doing the bed. But when I look at these, I see more similarities than differences. It seems like we're still trying to look to find someone who has an interesting personality. So in other words, I'm doomed to stay alone in this apartment forever. The desired number of children that people want to have has also been decreasing in time, where originally it was above replacement level, above 2.1%, but now decreasing, and now even the desired number of children when taken in toto across the entire sample size is now even below the population. So even if people could find their ideal spouse and could have their ideal number of children, Japan would still continue to shrink. For men and for women, the primary reason to have children is simply because they enjoy children. Having children makes my life more enjoyable and will enrich my mind. Still remains high for men and women. Number two is also similar between men and women, which is the reason they want to have children is to have the children of someone I love. How romantic. So, the primary reason that people would want to have children is not as superficial as some places would have you believe. They are not just having children to support me in my old age. They're not just having children to support me in society or for gaining recognition, but because they want children. So it's encouraging lofty romantic ideals that leads everyone to remain single and for the population to dwindle. So hopefully that was interesting, if just a lot of graphs. Should we also consider the results of married couples? Now, these are people who are actually in a financial situation, hopefully, to be able to have children, or at least a society-accepted circumstances to have children. Not surprising, with the overall decrease in overall fertility, the age at first encounter of the person who would be their eventual spouse and the age of marriage has been increasing over time. For all categories of marriages, including marriages of love and marriages that were arranged. This graph shows in time the fall off of arranged marriages in time, with these darker circles representing the arranged marriages, which is the traditional way of having marriages since 1935, which this graph was started, all the way through 2020, 2023-ish, versus the amount of marriages that were for so-called love. You see that, oh, we have love that's increasing in time. So most of the marriages that are in Japan now are for so-called love. So people who do get married and they do have children, how many kids do they have when they've finished having kids? It's a very odd phrasing when translated into English, but the completed number of children section is the number of children that you've had when you've done popping them out. So people who do get married do have a slight decrease in the number of children that have been produced within those marriages over time, but it's not that drastic, with over 50 years only dropping from 2.19, which would be above replacement level, to 1.9, which is slightly below replacement level. However, if we recall that the overall fertility of Japan is way less than 2 and almost down to 1, so that means on average, the number of kids that are produced within our marriage is right around replacement level, but the overall fertility is low. So the primary reason why the number of children is dropping is simply that marriages aren't being formed, which is unfortunate. The primary reason why Japan's fertility keeps dropping is that people are just not forming relationships that lead to marriage, rather than marriages being childless. So if we look at the survey and we say, of married couples, how many kids do you have, and then average that across the entire survey group, we see that the primary number of children that people have is still 2, which has more or less remained the same since the 70s, with a slight increase of the number of one-child families, and only a slight increase, although a doubling from 1977, of couples with no children. But that's only at 7.7% of surveyed couples had no children, which means that greater than 92% of all couples had children of some kind. And even looking later on down the road, 3% of couples have more than 4 kids, so they've more than replaced themselves twice over. That's half as many as to have no kids. So between these two, they've basically nullified each other. So that people who are in a married relationship are not principally responsible for not having enough kids. It just needs to be more marriage. And earlier marriage. Married people are not the issue. Now, here's a nice, fun stat for you. The other fun thing in Japan is simply, I think the stats more or less speak for themselves, but as one gets older, the frequency of engaging in interactions which would produce children decreases with, by the time one reaches 35, 54% of couples simply don't engage in these behaviors over the last month, leading to a rather stale relationship. Well, that was depressing. Not much we can do here, I suppose. Please make lots of cute little babies to ensure the survival of the human race. Otherwise, that's it for this week. I'm Trevor in Tokyo. See ya next time.